They came, they saw, they got fully ambushed, and I think they just about survived. I'm not going to say unscathed, but I think minor scratches and maybe an odd bruise, and not much worse than that. So we're going to talk about it, because if you are a South African or just associated with South Africa and on the internet in the last 12 to 14 hours, you will know that depending on who you ask, Trump got humiliated, Ramaphosa got humiliated, Ramaphosa got moord, apparently. Like, according to who you ask, there was a complete exposure of how terrible things are in South Africa. According to who you ask, there was a complete vindication of the facts and the truth, which is that there aren't terrible things happening specifically to white South Africans and specifically to farmers after that meeting. So let's dig into it. This is the Quarter Report, South Africa is a Movie. Welcome to the watch party. We're going to talk about that meeting. We're going to work through everything that happened in it. And we're going to talk about principally the strategies involved, what we thought were good moments or bad moments, where things went right and wrong. Like, for example, we're going to talk about Johan Rupert going a little bit off script and just going, oh, by the way, Steenhuisen, your Cape Flats ganglands crime situation, bro. Like seriously, bro. We're going to talk about the golfers who were there for some reason, because yes, Ramaphosa did draft in a crack team of whites, a crack team of white South Africans to confuse the living hell out of the Americans, and I think it kind of worked. And we're going to talk about the reaction from some American media, but mainly from South Africans. Because the EFF is incredibly upset. Former EFF leader Mbuyiseni Ndlozi is incredibly upset. The ANC is probably a little bit upset because the ambush really worked. The MK party is upset for some reason and says that this was an embarrassing moment of South Africa bowing to the evils, in spite of the fact that the MK party welcomed as a hero Trump's re-election and basically said he was going to be a champion of freedoms and fixing the world. They would love for you to forget that, but you know this show, we love a receipt and we're full of them. And then afterwards, after those two things we're going to speak about, we're finally going to talk about what's likely to happen next, based on what we've seen happen with Trump after previous meetings, how he is likely to respond to the media reporting of this meeting, whether or not he's going to come to the G20 or whether or not he's going to double down and treat South Africa worse. Is that good? Is that good?
I think so, Dan. Yeah.
Cool. I think that's good.
Yeah, it covers all the bases.
I'm going to try and remember everything. And one thing I promised to remind myself on was Tottenham Hotspur. So, as we've covered, going into this meeting, it felt like damage limitation. It felt like, how can we confuse the Americans, specifically the MAGA ones, and make them doubt the Kool-Aid that they've drank about what is allegedly actually happening in South Africa. After months and months of doubling down and executive orders and claiming things that are demonstrably false, like there's a white genocide here, like the 49, or I think it's 59 now, whatever, refugees and all that. I think we all knew that Trump wasn't going to be persuaded. It's not in his nature to ever acknowledge that he's been wrong. Nobody on earth believed that we were going to go there and change his mind, but we could sow some seeds of doubt. A lot of us were very fearful that this could go nuclear, like the Zelensky moment when J.D. Vance and Trump just lashed out at him. But as we reported on earlier this week, we were pretty sure that Ramaphosa, being a really good diplomat, really good negotiator, really good operator, would have a handle on keeping tensions down and would not be provoked and rise to anything that was thrown at him. The delegation that they sent was super interesting. So there was a late change. They chose not to send Mcebisi Jonas, the special envoy, because he has spoken out explicitly against Trump in the past. I think the South African delegation did actually say we made that strategic call to remove that kind of problem spark, because I think a lot of this was damage limitation. But the other thing that the South African delegation clearly wanted to do was to present what they felt was the truth about South Africa. So this was actually a big stage PR spotlight moment with the significant danger of the ambush that we did not know was coming to that extent. And I joked about it earlier, but I think strategically it was a very smart move to take a bunch of white men, a couple of them golfers, because one, the fundamental racism of MAGA America gets really confused at the sight of white people disagreeing with them, particularly about whether or not it is terrible to be white in South Africa. I think you could see in the room that Trump was behaving differently. I think that if we'd had an exclusively black delegation, or at least people of color delegation, we would have been disregarded and belittled. But look at the way that they listened to the white South Africans, didn't interrupt them, didn't speak over them. Ironically, we used their own racism and bigotries to our side's advantage. And sure, Ramaphosa didn't speak a lot, and we're going to talk in a second about whether or not he was overrun or shown up. But I think the strategic move to put Ernie Els and Retief Goosen in the room, as silly as it sounds, Trump likes golfers, let's take some golfers, actually made a difference. The fact that Steenhuisen was the one who spoke out against the ambush video initially, whether you agree with him or disagree with him, and we'll get into what he said, made a big difference to how Trump and his people responded. And literally, optically, it made a big difference. And then Johan Rupert, there are so many jokes about how it was so nice to see the president of South Africa take along Cyril Ramaphosa. We know that Johan Rupert was important to bringing this meeting together. He spoke a lot. And again, he's a mega billionaire. He's the kind of person who Trump loves and listens to. And so it made a lot of sense to put him in the room, as galling as it was, because I'm not a Johan Rupert fan. I'm not a fan of the system of economic apartheid and capitalistic exploitation that has made him sickeningly wealthy. I'm not a fan of billionaires having a huge influence over our politics. But him being in the room was, for South Africa's baseline interests, really, really good, because Trump respects billionaires. And I'm pretty sure Eric is now going to tell you something that I didn't know this morning, which is crazy to think about. Go, Eric.
Yeah, I think it's hilarious, right? Because Trump has to know about Johan Rupert. I feel like there's not a world in which Trump doesn't know about billionaires that are richer than him, because he's probably a bit envious.
Yeah.
And Johan Rupert's like 3 times richer than Trump.
I had no idea.
Trump's wealth is what, like $5 billion estimate, I think?
You looked it up on Forbes this morning, right?
Yeah, it was a $5 billion as far,
Something
if I'm not
like
mistaken. And Johan Rupert's is meant to be 14.
So he's thrice wealthier.
3 times, bro, pretty much.
Crazy. Okay, so now let's talk about the meeting. We were expecting some shenanigans, some chicanery, obviously, because this was definitely feeling like a setup, because why else would Trump allow for this meeting? It was an opportunity to push the agenda. Elon Musk was in the room. All of these people who are out to get South Africa in different ways. And the first thing that happened was they changed the running order. There was supposed to be a meet and greet and then some off the book stuff. And then like an hour later, they were supposed to meet the press. And what the White House did was, upon arrival, they changed it. Immediately, they went to the Oval Office in front of everybody. So immediately, it felt a little bit catch-off-guardy. And then it started fairly fine. And I know, again, we're going to talk at length about this. This is a real deep dive today, about whether or not we prevailed, survived, or were humiliated. But Ramaphosa spoke. He was calm. He was authoritative. He was diplomatic. He kept the energy quite mellow in the room. We knew he would do this. We have witnessed him do this for years. We laughed a few days ago about how, compared to some of the stuff Ramaphosa's had to face in Parliament, in the ANC, in the unions, in the anti-apartheid struggle, in big business, this was nothing. And Ramaphosa kept it cool. And then Trump said, oh, but we brought a PowerPoint. We have visuals. And they played, I think it was a couple of minutes video of, it was a supercut of Julius Malema singing Kill the Boer, a little bit of Jacob Zuma leading in Shinwam, a little bit of the kind of videos and pictures that we've seen of alleged mass graves and white crosses of farmers who have died. And this show is not digging into those claims. This show is not digging into the validity of that video. But it was clearly an ambush, because the MAGA Americans were like, this is our opportunity to paint South Africa as a horrifying place, specifically for white South Africans and specifically for farmers. So they play the video, and I think we were all panicking. We have a WhatsApp line for the show. If you don't listen to the podcast, if you only watch, the number is 0607613436. Lots of messages. And on the podcast, we kind of have the discussion and the dialogue. So if you're watching on YouTube, come across to the podcast, send messages through to the WhatsApp line, become a recorder. Kellen this morning or last night said, Dan, I'm sure I speak for most of my fellow recorders when I say, after what we just saw in the White House, you have permission to swear in the podcast. And I think that was the moment where we were like, oh, what's going to happen now? And then, bizarrely, an American journalist, straight after that video, asked Trump about a plane gift that he had got. And Trump freaked out, hey? He flipped. He wanted to chuck the guy out of the room. He was defending himself. He was raging against this journalist and their media organization and defending the situation with this gift of this plane. And ironically, it was like a blessing from the heavens because it immediately sucked the punch out of the video. It immediately destabilized the tension in the room. But nonetheless, of course, we were then almost exclusively going to speak about this video and about the claims. And this is where it is up to your own interpretation of what happened. Here's what I personally think. I think that Team South Africa, as I'll call them, did a very good job and had clearly been briefed on a simple message. Crime in South Africa is terrible. Please help us fix it. That was clearly the message. Crime overall is terrible. There's no specific ills towards white farmers or white people. White farmers and white people are not demonstrably treated worse or in more danger than the rest of the country. Crime in South Africa is the apocalypse, which we all agree on. And then please, America, help us fix this. Now, I think that please, America, help us fix this was a strategic choice because Trump loves being begged for help. He loves being told that he's the hero who will save us. He loves being the champion. He loves feeling like the biggest man in the room who people are begging for help and support. I think that strategic choice to placate Trump was very smart to roll in with Trump, you're wrong. It's actually a crime apocalypse affecting the whole country. I think that was very smart. I think it was a very, very, very good strategy. And I think it worked. I look forward to your comments. Okay, so then on Ramaphosa, he in the end didn't speak a lot. And some will say he got overrun. Some will say he got shown up or humiliated. I don't really think any of those things were true. But it is true that the big speaking points after that were from the white South Africans in Team South Africa's delegation. But again, strategically, if you're thinking about what will stop Trump and make him think again, with all of these white South Africans, Johan Rupert literally said he was the target number one of this kind of stuff, saying, nah, that's not the case. It is actually fundamentally a crime crisis across the country. And it's not specifically this, we need your help. I think that was a very, very effective strategy. Now, here's where it gets very frosty. Because John Steenhuisen probably, and I'm not a huge admirer of his work, but John Steenhuisen did a pretty good job of, and again, I'm only talking strategically here because we know that John Steenhuisen and the DA hates the EFF, blames them for all of these kinds of ills. And John Steenhuisen said, well, screw the EFF. They're a minority. They're bad elements. Like, we are thrilled that we are in government, the ANC and the DA, to keep them out. And that is genuinely what Steenhuisen and the DA believes. But it also played so well in the room because it allowed Team South Africa as a delegation to go, sure, they do sing those songs, but it's got nothing to do with us. We actually don't even really like that they do them. Because if the EFF had been in government and Team South Africa had to go across and say, yes, they're in our GNU government, but it's not really what we stand for, that would have been rough. And we wouldn't have been able to play it the way we played it. From that perspective, what Steenhuisen did was a good job and was helpful. Whether you agree with his sentiment about the EFF and Kill the Boer and Mshinwam also with Zuma or not. Then Johan Rupert spoke, and hilariously, he dragged Steenhuisen. He's clearly not a fan. He was clearly like, oh, by the way, the crime apocalypse in Cape Town, by the way, that your people are in charge of, like that Cape Flats gangsters. And that was wild, by the way. That was a whole thing happening in itself. And I think when you're as rich and powerful as Johan Rupert, you don't actually care about sticking to the script. If you're unhappy with someone in the room, you'll chat to them. You know what I'm saying? It
was funny because, I mean, he also technically called out Lamola. Yes. When you grabbed him on the shoulder and it was like when he was obviously referring to the videos of the youth league and all that stuff, and that's how the first time he ever met Lamola, he was alongside Julius Malema as well, and look how he turned out. Like, here he is, and Ronald smiled, dude. Yeah, the dynamics were wild. So that happened, and Trump was listening, and they were all listening, but I think it was mainly because it was the white men. It was mainly the white men. And then it got a little bit weird immigration apocalypse-y. It got a little bit like the illegal aliens. And I know that quite a few of them spoke about that. And maybe they genuinely believe that. But again, if you're only looking at it through the lens of strategy to placate Trump saying, we've got the same problem as you. Trump's obsession is with illegal immigration. To have these white men saying, there's a crime apocalypse, we need your help. We are not personally
being targeted, but we have a crisis at the border, just like you guys, and we need your help because you're the best at it. It's exactly the way to play Trump. It's exactly what Trump would want to hear. And so from a pure strategic point of view, before we talk about morals and ethics and whether or not they lied or whether or not we agree with what they said, it was really well handled. Then we had Ernie Els and Retief Goosen saying some stuff. I think they were mainly there because they're white men who are very, very, very good at golf. And although a couple of times, one of them in particular said, I've had friends who are attacked, I've had friends who are farmers, everyone's in fear or whatever, they kept going back to there's a crime crisis across the country. We live incredibly privileged lives. Everything is not the way that the MAGA Americans think that it is. And then the COSATU representative, I think, did fantastically. She was great. She was talking about all of the other crises that we have in South Africa to basically lay out the true state of South Africa in a moment where the MAGA Americans really thought that they were going to catch us. And the meeting ended with Trump going, oh, okay. Remember, he was never going to change his mind. He was never going to admit that he was wrong. But to say that, we might be at the G20 is pretty wild, considering the day or 2 days before Marco Rubio had been saying, we're not going to go and South Africa's the worst and everything they do is antithetical to our interests as America. For Trump to be like, oh, okay. At the end, I think has to be looked at as a victory. Not a big one, but like as in we survived. We made it out. It didn't get far worse. Now, the question about whether we prevailed is different, whether or not we won the day. I don't think it's clear that we won the day. We are yet to see the extent to which this will shape future America-South Africa relations. But broadly, it wasn't a disaster. And broadly, I'm struggling to imagine how realistically it could have gone any better. From the specific strategic perspective of how to placate Trump, how to try and cause confusion in MAGA America about South Africa, and maybe long-term create a path to better US-South Africa relations. So that's where I am on it. What do you reckon?
Yeah, it's a weird one because I kind of understand where people like Ndlozi are coming from, because I think if you had to look at the president alone in isolation here, as in Ramaphosa, I could see a world in which like you could agree with the fact that he wasn't necessarily a strong leadership figure, but that's not really who Ramaphosa is. I feel like whenever we've seen him, he's always been the diplomatic one. He's not going to try and shout over Trump. And I think that there was an issue with maybe the way like questions were answered. Questions were obviously being thrown around by the media all over the place. I mean, that wasn't the only reporter Trump raged at, to be fair. The other one obviously brought up Gaza, and nothing was ever said about it. It was just like, next question, you can leave now. But I think that maybe that attitude of like being more diplomatic and kind of almost like waiting his turn, which he didn't get many of, let's be honest, because I feel like Trump wanted to answer everything. Although I must say, my favorite moment where Ramaphosa answered a question on Trump's behalf was great.
Describe it.
Because the question was something along the line, I can't remember, verbatim now, but it was something along the lines of like how these bilateral talks are going to happen. Like, how can we move forward between like Trump and South African relations and things like that. Yeah. And Ramaphosa was like, I got this. What Trump is going to do is he's going to come and he's going to, and then he made this, like he put his finger and everything. He was like, he's going to listen to our delegation, listen calmly, listen to, basically saying, listen to all these white folks that disagree with you.
Totally.
And then come out of it with some kind of conclusion.
Right.
So I thought that was quite funny. And also an excellent point, though, to be fair, because I think that's what needs to happen. And you're absolutely right. The whole point of having white people in this delegation is the fact that, it's people that Trump will listen to. You can see almost like the body language shift throughout the whole event whenever, Johan Rupert or Ernie Els or Goosen was speaking, right?
Totally.
So it is interesting in that respect, but I can also understand this almost like anger at Ramaphosa as an African leader.
Yeah. You bent
placating.
over.
Yeah, placating Trump. But I
you
think
didn't go and stand up for us.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
didn't basically give the middle finger.
Yeah. And so yeah, it's a toss up in my opinion. I do think it's fascinating that, any Trump supporters online are pretty much all like, it was the greatest own of any world leader ever because he brought out some papers with paper clips on them where they just printed out news stories.
Yeah. Whereas cheekily, and Ramaphosa is so good at this, he always does the wink, nudge, poke. It's always like you're not quite sure when it's happening that he's mocking you. But that moment when he was like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have a plane for you. Just like vintage, slightly undermining, laugh, get away with it, power dynamic play.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the reaction to this in South Africa. So the right, and we spoke about this 2 days ago, Eric, when you so excellently pointed out how ugly and awful the internet is, that it's always humiliated, destroyed, debates, destroys, like, clips taken out of context and just spin. So the right, the far right in South Africa and America is like, they murdered him, like it was absolutely brutal, rah, rah, rah.
Yeah, they came with receipts, but like at the same time, guys, you got to remember that the receipts are also only half true.
Yeah. And sometimes demonstrably false. So there's that. The EFF are very touched because Malema was basically made the scapegoat. But it's interesting now because the next time the world, and particularly the right wing in America, gets upset about the next time that Malema will inevitably sing "Kill the Boer," Steenhuisen has now framed it as, oh, that crazy person who's not in government and is actually small fry. So that's interesting. A lot of the far left and the kind of like Africanist revolutionary left, led by Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, are outraged and say that it's a humiliation and it's kind of an unforgivable moment for Ramaphosa. The MK party, as I said, hilariously have a lot of hot topics, things to say about how bad this was, despite the fact that they welcomed Trump as a hero and have never even explicitly like disagreed with him about the refugees or about the misinformation or the executive orders. Although they did try to take Afroforum to court about that stuff, they never explicitly criticized Trump. So MK are charlatans, and we can just leave it at that. So I think the DA will be happy that they got that messaging out that Steenhuisen was there, although I think they will be touched about Johan Rupert's comment, which I think will come back to haunt them, and I think will be used a lot in the coming weeks, months, even in next year's local government elections. I think that'll be used as a stick to beat them with. I think a lot of people in the ANC will be upset with how Ramaphosa handled himself in a similar way to the EFF leadership and ex-EFF leadership are. I think some people in the ANC will just go, we made it out. Because I don't think anything in that meeting will be long-term damaging for them at all, to be honest. And yeah, depending on who you ask, South Africans feel differently. So again, from the WhatsApp line, we have a message in from MK. Some thoughts on the US-South Africa bilateral. One, Ramaphosa was magnificent. I wouldn't go that far, but again, everyone's got different opinions. That's what the show is about. Two, Trump's face when Steenhuisen was explaining that most fathers want to stay was priceless. Three, we know these things are about performance for domestic viewers too, fine, but South Africa looked fantastic on the world stage, our viewers, and got positive commentary worldwide. Four, in its absurdity, the whole situation has provided a crystallizing moment where people need to decide and state in public where they stand. It's been great to see people like Rupert Steenhuisen, farmers, etc., state explicitly on the record that there is no genocide. Five, South Africa presented to the world a vision of a democracy with different votes and different backgrounds working together. And then separately, Pete on the WhatsApp line says, I'm proud of the South African delegation and awkwardness aside, I think it was worthwhile. What's not cool is seeing some of the right wing gloating on Twitter that somehow Trump would CR Cyril Ramaphosa. So all different facts and opinions, or perspectives and opinions. You can join the WhatsApp line, let us know. We play them out particularly on the podcast, the full podcast that you can listen to on Spotify and Apple Music. Right. What is likely to happen next? Well, Donald Trump has a long, thorough track record of doing a meeting, being involved in something, and then 24 hours to 48 hours later, completely changing his position, completely changing tack, and usually raging in one way or another, gaslighting and twisting what happened into something else. That could very well happen here, because usually what happens with Trump is he's involved in something, then he watches how it is reported on, not just on the right, not just on Fox News, but all across, because he gets particularly outraged at what he feels are mischaracterizations of him in more left-wing media or centrist media. And that often spurs him or triggers him, provokes him into lashing out and changing his read, his perspective, his take, his position on what had just happened. So we're in for an interesting 48 to 72 hours. Obviously, the people in his camp who think terrible things are happening in South Africa or who believe it's politically advantageous to them to push that stuff will say, yeah, but like we're still bringing in more refugees, right? We're still going to bring across more Afrikaners. We're still going to bash South Africa. Musk has not changed his mind. The rest of them have not changed their minds. And so the next 48 to 72 hours will be interesting. But maybe, just maybe, this could cause a kind of chilling out moment where America, or Trump's America, stops using South Africa as the go-to punching bag whenever they want to change the narrative and basically make the world not look at the bad things that are happening, but look over there at something happening allegedly in South Africa. So we'll see. In the next 72 hours, Trump may completely change his position or his read or his response. And after that will be stage 2, where we see if this causes a changing of relations, a thawing of relations. We will have to see.